Madigan. I'm a senior lecturer in architecture at the University of South Australia, and I'm a housing researcher. And the type of research I do focuses on our older established suburbs and how we can meet some of our infill housing targets whilst keeping the best parts of the suburbs that we love. And that includes the landscape as well as some of our older housing. We know that in the suburbs in Adelaide, we face a bit of pressure with what is called minor infill. And it's where single houses, traditionally single family homes, such as those we're seeing in grey here on this slide, are knocked down and replaced with a 3-for-1 development, such as this one over here on the left and this one at the top of the screen, and 2-for-1 development, where we see one house demolished and two put up with the block subdivided down the middle. So the work I do looks at how we can find alternatives to this, because one of the things that we find with this sort of infill model is that we get the extra housing we need, but we don't necessarily get more affordable housing or greater housing choice in the suburbs. And yet we know that in the suburbs there are lots of alterations and additions that go on all the time. So we're seeing lots of change in our suburbs, but we don't see all that much change in the housing type. And so I'm particularly interested in the way that we have over time put in all sorts of additions and alterations to our suburbs. So can we use that model of development, that pattern of alterations and additions, to create different housing forms that suit our demographic needs as society changes? If we look at a typical inner Adelaide suburb, we can see in the one image a few different housing phenomena going on. We have the existing older houses that haven't really been renovated. They might have a lean-to on them, but those lean-tos might be original, but nothing else has really changed, and we have a big backyard. We have the same types of houses that have been extended over time. The garden gets shortened. Quite often we lose mature landscape in that process. So there are 3 of them here. In the middle here, we have an older house that's been demolished and replaced with a much larger single house. So again, more of the block gets covered. We lose lots of the landscape. And then we have the duplex option, where one house gets demolished and subdivided into 2 duplexes. And although these are generally smaller than the existing houses, they're not necessarily more affordable. So it might be the case that in many of our suburbs, one of these dwellings actually costs more to purchase than the single house that they've replaced. So we can get a bit of an affordability issue going on in our older suburbs, where we're losing houses, gaining more houses, but not necessarily gaining housing diversity or housing affordability. And when I say diversity, I'm really talking about the choice in the sizes of the houses. So if you want to downsize, for example, in the suburb, how do you do it? Well, the real option for many of our suburbs is the block of flats. And so we have them in 2-story options like we have here on these 2 street corners, and we have them in single-story options as well. In either case, there's quite often a lot of driveway for car parking, a lot of hard surface, not much landscape, and not a great connection to the garden with many of the units. So when we look at all of this together, we can see a group of issues coming together. We know that our suburbs will continue to change around us. That's just inevitable. It's going to happen whether we like it or not. We know that more housing is being provided in our suburbs, and that's a good thing. However, the creation of this new housing isn't actually resulting in greater housing choice for our residents. So the question is, instead of demolishing our older houses in our established suburbs, maybe instead can we alter and extend them, just like people do to make single houses bigger, but to create small infill housing instead that's suitable for a variety of needs. And so this housing model that I've been working with for a number of years now is currently speculative. It's not permitted under our existing planning system, which is where the Co-Housing for Ageing Well project comes in. Part of the goal for this is to test these ideas for single allotments in the suburbs and to see if we can find a way to, if there's an attraction to the model, to see if there's a way that we can get it into our planning system in the state's new planning and design code. And so there are a group of fantastic partners in this project. It's primarily funded by the Office for Ageing Well, which is part of SA Health, and the State Planning Commission and the Department of Planning, Transport and Infrastructure, who are rolling out and developing the new Planning and Design Code, are involved in the project as well. And then we have 4 fantastic council partners: the City of Unley, who are managing the project, the City of Burnside, the Town of Walkerville, and the City of Prospect. And at UniSA Creative, we're doing the housing research for the project. So what is co-housing? I need to just take a moment to explain what it is. In co-housing, individuals own or rent their own self-contained dwelling and a share of a common house. So it's not a share house arrangement, but it might be that elements are shared across the allotment and across the different dwellings, but each dwelling is itself self-contained and complete. The common house typically contains a shared kitchen, dining and living space, and these are very large so that groups of people can come together and share time together when they wish. A shared laundry and a guest bedroom that the residents can use on a roster basis. So instead of having an extra bedroom in your individual dwelling, you might forego that and take advantage of the shared spare bedroom or guest bedroom in the common house. So when someone comes to stay, for example, that might be really convenient for you to use in the common house, which means you don't have to have that space in your other dwelling. So it enables you to maybe downsize to something smaller and to still take advantage of guest bedrooms and things like that. So this allows the individual dwellings to remain small, whilst the overall amenity across the development is high. And importantly, the garden is shared in a typical co-housing project. So the work we've been doing and the work leading up to this that I've been working on for a few years is all around the idea of not taking a site and carving it up into individual allotments, but taking the site as a single entity and designing the housing around large, high-quality shared gardens. So single, high-quality landscape space rather than multiple, smaller, lower-quality landscape space. And in this Co-Housing for Ageing Well project, we're investigating what might be described as co-housing light in a way, with degrees of sharing. And by that I mean, we've investigated 4 sites, and these are the 4 design proposals for it. All completely imagined, completely speculative, but they are based on 4 actual sites across the 4 council areas. In the extra large scheme, which is a typical quarter-acre block or just short of a quarter-acre block, we do have a common house that has the spare bedroom, the big kitchen, the big dining room and all that sort of stuff. And in the very small, which is only 325 square metres, we have a shared laundry. So that frees up the dwellings to not have to have their own laundries in them. But in the other 2 options, which are the ones I'm going to show you in detail today, the medium and the large, they're really only sharing the garden. So the benefit of this co-housing light approach is that you get the individual dwellings without having to really share anything other than the landscape space. So essentially it's a unit development, but hopefully of a much higher amenity. And all of them have in common the fact that we're keeping the existing housing regardless of whether it's heritage listed or not. We're keeping them because they're great houses to retain. They're very functional still. They can be adapted quite easily. And it retains that neighbourhood character and the scale of the places that we've loved for so many years. And we're either trying to keep mature landscape, mature trees, or if we can't, to create enough deep soil or deep root soil zones and space so that we can plant trees that can grow to maturity to either a large or a medium size. At the end of the project, we've created a design report that really captures the whole project in a hopefully easy to read and succinct manner. One of the things we talk about in that report is how we arrived at the decisions that we did. We ran a co-design workshop. Co-design is where you essentially say, look, we don't have all the answers. I might be an architect, but I don't pretend to know everything about housing. And people have a lot of fantastic embodied knowledge about housing and what they like and what they don't like and what they aspire to. And so a co-design process allows people to explore the options on the table and suggest what might work and might not work, and things that we might not have thought of as the designers ourselves. So in this case, the participants were given a spatial budget, so just like a financial budget, where you have a fixed pot of money and you have to spend it wisely and allocate certain amounts to certain things at certain times. We ran through a process of giving people a spatial budget. So we told them that their allocated space was very small. Let's say about 55 square metres for an individual house, so really small. We were really testing what sort of amenity we could get out of small spaces. And then we gave them a whole list of things like a medium bedroom, small bedroom, large bedroom, small, medium and large kitchen, etc., etc., and gave them that at the same sort of size. And so they could take the coloured blocks and cut that they're already cut out for them and arrange them on their sheets to see what would fit and what wouldn't fit. And what this did was enable people to very quickly and easily make choices about what they could maybe live without if they went super small, and what they definitely wanted to have in their houses. And so that helped us develop a small one-bedroom dwelling for a number of small one-bedroom dwellings for this project. Why one bedroom? We all would love more bedrooms. If we had unlimited space and unlimited money, we would love to have extra space. The difficulty with that thinking, though, however, is that, or should I say, the thinking around, well, we should never provide one-bedroom houses for people, because there is a thought that maybe we should never do that. We should only ever provide two bedrooms. The difficulty with that thinking is that if we keep producing 2 and 3 bedroom units, we keep providing the same housing models, and we keep locking certain people out of certain suburbs by creating an affordability problem. So the idea in this project is to say, well, look, it's not a real project. It's just getting ideas down in a detailed way and working out some possibilities. Why don't we try some one-bedroom options to see how much amenity we can get? So we have quite large bedrooms and bathrooms, quite decent-sized kitchens. They're small, but they're quite serviceable. Here we have little laundries inside a cupboard. So rather than having a laundry elsewhere, we are providing individual laundries, and a relatively generous living and dining space, and good circulation through the floor plan for mobility, which obviously is very important as we all get older, that we're able to move around our houses with comfort and safety, particularly if we've had a mobility issue either through ill health or injury. So then that begs the question, if we've got these one-bedroom houses, well, they're a tiny house or a granny flat, aren't they? That's kind of what we're doing. Well, the answer is no, they're not. They're certainly not a tiny house, and they're definitely not a granny flat either. We don't like to use the word granny flat. It suggests that this is a house for a certain person or a certain demographic, and it also suggests that it's okay to put granny in some small little thing out in the backyard, and that's not what this project is about. So why are they not an accessory dwelling unit or a granny flat? Well, this is the size here in the middle of an accessory dwelling unit, which is the technical name for what the housing market calls a granny flat. Down the bottom here is a granny flat that you can buy at the moment, and that's 39 square metres. And this accessory dwelling unit is 40 square metres, which is around the size that the Planning and Design Code, when it comes out, is likely to allow. And you can see the difference there between those small sizes and what we're proposing. So yes, they're one bedroom, but they're significantly bigger. When we look at a tiny house, which people seem to be very excited about at the moment, we can see just how tiny a tiny house is. The longest of them, or the biggest of them, one that has the bedroom at the same level as the living space, is really tiny. They're 7.2 metres long, and they're the width of our bathroom, which is 2.4 metres. Tiny houses are tiny, they're that 2.4 metre width, because they're designed to fit on a trailer and driven to a site. The smaller ones that have the bedrooms up in a loft, which is the type of thing you see in the lifestyle TV shows where they build tiny houses on trailers, they're really quite tiny indeed. They're barely, the smallest one is barely bigger than the bathroom. And so again, these are three tiny houses that are on the market. You can get online and buy them now. So the market is already providing these houses. So we're really about saying, okay, small but amenable, high amenity. In the design report, we describe some of the design strategy or the design tactics that are embedded in the work that might not otherwise be readily apparent when you're looking at the designs. So, for example, when you're looking at the designs in the report, you'll see some big windows that go down to the floor, and they're at least as tall as a door and at least as wide. And the reason we provide door-sized windows is so that the building becomes as adaptable as possible. If down the track you decide that you want to extend these small footprint buildings, it's quite easy to do by taking out the window, and you've got an instant connection into the extension. Another thing we do for adaptability is to limit the amount of what we would call hard infrastructure, so plumbing and electrics. We minimize that to, for example, the corner of the building, and we put in electrical runs in the floor, for example, and around the perimeter of the building with skirting boards. And then we can fit out the rest of the building in what we call soft infrastructure, which is fixed furniture or joinery, so kitchens, laundries, and dividing units. So in a one-bedroom dwelling, why build a wall and put a cupboard against it when you could build the cupboard and use that to divide the spaces instead? And then you fit it out with loose furniture that is owned by the occupants. And so by creating this sort of hard infrastructure and soft infrastructure and keeping the rest of the house very empty, we end up with some good adaptability. So again, if this wants to change down the track, it's fairly easy to take out these elements and reconfigure it for the next user. We provide pitched roofs in the little houses for a couple of reasons. One, it helps us get a good contextual fit with the neighbourhood and the older houses that we're around. And two, it enables us to provide some attic storage, which we can access with drop-down ladders. Drop-down ladders, attic ladders are very good these days. They can be motorised, so at a push of a button it'll drop down, and they can have handrails and all sorts of things. And perhaps if you're an older person who doesn't or can't access or doesn't want to or can't access attic roof storage, it might be that you have a family member or a friend or someone else who lives on site who can help you access the storage when you need it. And this is an idea that where we think there might be seasonal storage here. So winter clothes might be up there in summer and vice versa. And so you can rotate storage to free up space in the house proper. And by having a pitched roof, we can express that over the living spaces and make it, again, more amenable. Even though it's a small footprint, we get lots of good windows and light coming into them. We're not providing full accessible bathrooms to the Australian standard because that would take up too much space. Instead, and because these houses aren't designed for disability, but they are designed for increased mobility as we get older. Instead, we provide bathrooms and kitchens and bedrooms to the Livable Housing Australia gold or platinum level of mobility. And we have examples of that in the design report, showing the types of spaces that we need to have around beds and in front of furniture as a minimum and in bathrooms in order to meet those mobility levels. Having privacy in these sorts of schemes is really important. So this is a little difficult to read because it's a zooming in on part of one of the designs. But in the shared garden, we deliberately have the public spaces or the more public spaces of the houses, which are the living areas, directly facing onto that garden. And that's great for amenity for the residents, but also great for some passive observation of your neighbours. If you don't see your neighbour for a day or two when you expect to see them, it can prompt you to knock on their door and check that they're okay. However, the private areas, the bedroom, we put those away from everyone else and they have their own view out to a private, more private garden so that you can have that bedroom as a bit of a retreat space because we don't always want to be on show to everyone. The spaces between the dwellings, we try and get 8 metres where possible because that's a really useful benchmark for creating decent separation between doors, for example, and it also provides us really good garden space for mature landscape. And what that does when we have mature landscape and space is allow pets. Pets we know are super important for our health and well-being, both emotional and physical. And pets are often something that we have to give up when we move to smaller dwellings, or they might be the things that delay our movement to a smaller dwelling when we otherwise might have desired to go to something smaller. And so having companion animals in these types of designs are possible, whereas they aren't as much in a traditional unit development. So let's quickly talk about these design studies. There were 4 of them, as I mentioned. I'm going to discuss the medium and the large in a little bit more detail. The medium is a 530 square metre block, which is 15.2 metres wide or 50 feet. And it's a very typical block width for Adelaide's suburbs. And this is the current arrangement. It's a villa and it has an extension on the back and it's covering 40% of the site. This is the co-housing for ageing well concept applied to the project. We have a small backyard dwelling, the extension is gone, and we're actually covering 35% of the site. So we're returning a little bit of the site back to garden, which is a really useful thing. What we are doing though is putting a second story in this backyard, which is testing the idea that maybe it's not such a bad thing to propose a second story behind an old cottage or villa. So we can tuck in within the roof line of the villa, we can tuck in a little second story dwelling here. And we can imagine this scenario when we're looking at the plan on the right hand side. That's the villa, the street is at the top of the page, and this is the ground floor in the backyard, and that's the upper level sitting over the top. What we can do is imagine that, let's say people have lived on this site for a while and they're eyeing off retirement or early retirement down the track, and they might have an adult child who is struggling to get into the housing market and facing a potential lifetime of rent, or they might have an adult child with special needs and they're looking to be able to set them up with some level of independence. They might also be looking at working from home and semi-retiring so that as they age, they're able to do so with financial well-being, not just housing well-being and health well-being. And so this is designed where the villa gets converted into a 2-bedroom house. So there are 2 bedrooms, living area and kitchen dining at the front, and a bathroom and laundry at the back. We have the shared garden in the middle, and then the backyard dwelling is a 1-bedroom house using those flexibility or adaptability tactics I talked about before with the removable furniture. There's a stairwell at the side, and that takes you up to another 2 bedrooms. So this could actually be a 3-bedroom house or a ground floor office and 1 or 2 bedrooms upstairs. And the stairwell here is actually a fire stair. It's accessed through a fire door coming from the ground floor, just like a hotel, 2 hotel rooms might have a fire door in between them. And you come up the stairs and you arrive at the upper level. If you wanted to convert the upper level to be a single bedroom self-contained dwelling, you can repeat the ground floor plan. We've got plumbing in the cupboards up the top here, and you can come straight up the stairs and into your own dwelling there. As we look at the floor plan, it's really about designing from boundary to boundary, and rather than carving up the site, saying, well, look, how can we fit something in the backyard that is not just a kind of second accessory dwelling or a so-called granny flat, but it is a proper small footprint house. And so we end up with the same amount of ground cover that we had previously, but we've got at least 2 dwellings on the site, and it could even be 3 or 2 dwellings and a work from home arrangement. And what it's demonstrating is that density and infill and increasing density, housing density, isn't necessarily about also losing landscape or also losing amenity. So you can imagine a family doing some sort of development like this to their advantage. In the large site, it's 675 square metres, it's a corner block, and we see a cottage here that's not heritage listed. None of the schemes that we've been looking at are considered heritage listed in these schemes, and this is the type of house that we might lose quite easily if it's knocked down and redeveloped. This is the current condition. It's covering 34% of the site, and it's a cottage with an extension and a garage at the back. There's the main street at the front here and a second street down the side. In the co-housing for aging well concept, that's the cottage. We remove the extension. We build a small footprint extension over here and shift it to the side in order to open up some garden here on the right-hand side. And we build a little backyard house that's about the same size as the garage, but instead of housing cars, we're housing people. There's a carport next to it there instead for the cars. It's low scale. We take our cues from the existing cottage and we convert the cottage into a 2-bedroom dwelling. It has its own laundry and kitchen and bathroom and dining and living space, just like the medium scheme we just looked at. And here's a little 1-bedroom addition, again fully self-contained, and a 1-bedroom backyard dwelling, again self-contained. The one in the backyard is the one we were looking at before when we were comparing the size to an accessory dwelling unit or a tiny house. When we look at the entire thing across the site, again, it's a design for boundary to boundary. We're not putting up fences between the dwelling. We're consolidating the landscape into a high quality space that everyone can enjoy. This is the diagram we were looking at for the privacy issues, with the living spaces opening out onto this rather generous garden and the bedrooms being away. So in the cottage, the bedrooms are at the front of the house, so they face away from the communal areas, and the bedroom for the addition here in the middle also points away, as does the one for the backyard house. There are 4 sheds on the site, a shed for the garden and 1 shed for each of the dwellings for storage. There's space for rubbish bins over here behind a screen in a utility yard, and they're bins for the backyard dwelling and the addition dwelling here in the middle. The one at the front has its own rubbish bin storage at the front here, and it has its washing line here and a car park. The dwelling in the middle, number 2, has its own washing area, drying area here, and number 3 has its own drying area over here, and the carports here house 2 cars, one for the dwelling at the back and one for the middle. So we get a really good sense that it has all the stuff that a single home needs, but we're combining it on the one site, but still working to get that amenity and the neighbourliness within the site, whilst also giving back to the neighbourhood and giving back to the community by not losing the cottage, by not overdeveloping the site, and by maintaining a really pleasant garden. What might one of these look like in the flesh? Well, we're unable to do one in the flesh yet, but we can do one digitally and imagine what it might be like. And so here we have an aerial view of the cottage on the left, the addition in the middle, and the backyard dwelling on the right, with the carport and that service yard on the far right-hand side, all centered around or wrapping around this rather generous shared garden. We can stand on the back on the roof of the backyard dwelling and look down and get a sense of the relationship between the old house and the new addition and how well they might come together. From the street, we see exactly what we saw before. It's a cottage, it gets renovated, we don't see anything behind it. We maintain that street character. As we turn the corner of the site is also retained and enhanced. We see the old cottage just as it's been for decades. As we walk down the side street, we see the addition to the house, but rather than making the single house bigger, this is an addition that houses someone else. As we come down further and look to the left, we start to see the backyard dwelling in the space where a garage might normally be. And as we walk down the street further, we see that garage-sized house. As I said before, instead of a building to house cars, it's a building to house people. As we walk back up the side street and look down the gate, we see the relationship between the dwelling 2, which is the addition on the right-hand side, and we can just see on the left there behind the bushes the backyard dwelling number 3. And we can imagine this lady in the middle of the picture. She lives in the cottage, and perhaps she's walked from the cottage across the deck in front of the dwelling 2, which is the addition to her house, and she's going to have a coffee with the resident of dwelling 3 in the backyard. As we pivot around, we get that sense that the garden is generous enough to be a dog, so maybe one of these residents owns a dog. One owns it, but everyone benefits from the companionship of it, and maybe they decide to take the dog for a walk together sometimes. We're standing now outside that backyard dwelling, looking back towards the cottage, and we can see the deck being used as a connective piece between the three dwellings. But maybe the residents of this unit, this development, decide that they don't like it being so close together and people walking past each other's front doors all the time. So it might be as simple as buying a planter box, planting it out, and softening the distances between and forcing people to walk down through the garden to get to another dwelling. These are the types of things that we're very interested in investigating, is how we can either dial up or dial down how much interaction people have, depending on what the residents themselves want. And each of these developments might be different. Some might be radically different, some might be subtly different. And so you can imagine a multi-generational scenario where perhaps the young family here, maybe they own the house and they're developing something with a parent or an older relative or an older acquaintance or friend for them to live in the backyard. Or maybe it's the older person who owns the property and they've gone in on a development with the younger family to give them a foothold in the housing market. Either way, it's housing that we're investigating for a degree of sharing, but also a degree of autonomy. It's not a unit development. They're not accessory dwelling units. It's a type of housing model that really doesn't exist at the moment, and it really relies on keeping the existing housing and trying to not just provide some of the housing we need, but to try and maintain some of the best aspects of what we love about our older suburbs. And I thank you for listening. If you're wanting to download the report, you can download it from my website, which is madigan-architecture.com.